Captain Celine Voss crouched low, her pulse steady despite the looming threat. The dim light of distant stars filtered through the narrow viewports of the Shadow Legion's stealth ship, the Obsidian Veil, as it drifted silently toward the enemy stronghold on the moon of Vaxar 4. The Therax had long claimed this desolate world as their central command post, but Earth's hidden war was far from over. "We're in position, Captain." Lieutenant Riker's voice crackled over the comm, his tone tight with anticipation. "No sign of enemy patrols yet." Celine's dark eyes flicked to the tactical display, tracking the movement of the Therax forces on the surface. The shadow of their immense war machines was unmistakable. If they were detected, the entire mission would be compromised. "We move now," she ordered, her voice quiet but firm. The team, clad in adaptive stealth armor, slipped from the shadows of the ship's hold and onto the surface of Vaxar 4. Their movements were precise and calculated, honed by years of training in silent operations. As they advanced, the oppressive silence of the alien world swallowed them whole, their breath muffled by the helmets that concealed their faces. The objective was clear: sabotage the Therax's comm relay, cutting off their ability to coordinate reinforcements. Without it, the alien force would be thrown into disarray, buying Earth's forces time to regroup. But nothing about this mission felt simple. "We're approaching the relay station," Sergeant Cade whispered, his voice low but intense. "No signs of resistance, Captain." Celine nodded, scanning the horizon. The Therax built their installations with ruthless efficiency, and this one was no different. Imposing, nearly invisible against the backdrop of the barren moon. The relay station hummed faintly, a steady pulse of energy radiating from it. But as the team drew closer, Celine's instincts flared. Something was wrong. "Stop," she commanded sharply, holding up a fist. Her fingers flexed around the hilt of her combat knife, an old but trusted weapon. The faintest ripple in the air, the kind only someone trained to notice would catch, signaled danger. Before anyone could react, the ground erupted in an explosion of alien fire. The Therax had been waiting for them. The team scattered instinctively, using the natural cover of the moon's jagged surface to shield themselves. Celine's heart raced as she dove behind a rocky outcrop, scanning the sky for the origin of the blast. The enemy was too prepared. They knew they were coming. "We've got company," Riker said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Multiple targets incoming. Heavy firepower." Celine clenched her jaw, eyes narrowing in frustration. They had underestimated the Therax's readiness. Whoever had given them the intel about this location had been wrong. This was not just a communications hub. It was a trap. The first wave of Therax soldiers descended from above in armored drop pods, their sleek insectoid bodies darting through the air with unnatural precision. These were no ordinary foot soldiers. They were elite, equipped with adaptive cloaking devices that rendered them nearly invisible to the human eye. The team was outmatched, but not outclassed. Celine motioned for her team to fall into defensive formation, quickly adapting to the unexpected assault. Cade fired first, his plasma rifle flashing with lethal energy as he took down the closest target. The alien soldiers shimmered in and out of visibility, but the Legion's training had prepared them for just such an ambush. "Regroup," Celine barked, signaling to her team to move forward. She led them in a rush toward the relay station's core, knowing they couldn't afford to waste time. The Therax would keep coming, relentless and unyielding, but they had a mission to complete. Earth's survival depended on it. As they fought their way through the ambush, Celine's mind raced. This was no ordinary raid. Someone had tipped off the Therax. Someone knew they were coming. And if the Therax had anticipated their every move, it meant Earth's secret war was no longer as hidden as it needed to be. The ambush on Vaxar 4 had shaken Celine to her core, but it wasn't the immediate danger that gnawed at her. It was the deeper, more insidious truth that had emerged in the heat of battle. The Therax knew they were coming. There was a traitor within the Shadow Legion, someone feeding their movements to the enemy. The obsidian veil coasted through the void on its return journey to Earth, the faint hum of its stealth systems barely audible as the team huddled around a secure communications console in the ship's war room. Celine stood at the head of the table, eyes narrowed as she scanned the faces of her team. They had made it out of the ambush alive, but the question now loomed. Who among them could have compromised the mission? "Captain," Riker began, his voice steady but strained. "The Therax were too prepared for us. We've never had a response that fast before. Someone tipped them off." "I know," Celine replied, her gaze flicking to each of her team members. They all bore the signs of battle. The grime of conflict smeared across their suits, their faces tight with exhaustion. She trusted them all implicitly, or at least she had. The silence in the room was thick with the weight of the accusation. It was a long-held rule within the Legion. Trust, once broken, could never be mended. And now that trust had been shattered. "We'll get to the bottom of this," Celine continued, her voice cold with resolve. "I want everyone's gear and communications logs reviewed. Anyone found with discrepancies is out. No exceptions." The room remained still, the tension palpable. No one spoke, though the weight of the accusation hung over them. Celine's mind raced as she turned back to the console, pulling up the mission logs. The data from the infiltration should have been secure, but there were gaps, unexplained holes in the transmissions, moments where the encryption had been bypassed. She knew better than to think it was a coincidence. The traitor was close, very close. "Captain, we've reached Earth's orbit." Cade's voice broke the silence, and Celine looked up to see the young surgeon standing at the doorway. He was the youngest on the team, but his instincts were razor-sharp. "We're docking in 30 minutes. What are your orders?" Celine's jaw tightened. It was time to face the truth. If the traitor was on Earth, they would need to uncover them before the Legion became even more vulnerable. The Therax were not the only threat they faced now. "We'll conduct an internal investigation," she ordered. "Everyone is to remain on high alert. No one leaves this ship without my say-so, and no one trusts anyone until we found out who did this." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, but it was clear that their unity had been fractured. Even the most loyal soldiers now looked at one another with suspicion. Celine turned to Riker. "I'll take point on this investigation. We can't afford another failure." "Understood, Captain," he replied, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Celine noticed it, but said nothing. They all felt the weight of what was at stake. As the obsidian veil docked with Earth's hidden military base, Celine's thoughts kept returning to the Therax's unnerving response. The traitor might have compromised their mission on Vaxar 4, but the Therax weren't their only concern anymore. The war had just become far more dangerous. The time for silent shadows was over. The truth had to come to light, and quickly. The investigation into the betrayal within the ranks of the Shadow Legion was still ongoing, but Captain Celine Voss had no time to dwell on suspicion. The Therax were relentless, and time was running out. Earth's resistance, though growing stronger, needed more than just sabotage. It needed a weapon capable of shifting the balance of the war. Celine's team was dispatched to the ruins of humanity's ancient cities, long forgotten in the wake of the alien invasion. Earth's history had been erased in the eyes of the Therax, but deep within the decaying structures of civilization, there were whispers of a long-lost power, something from humanity's past that could turn the tide. The ancient warriors who had fought before were now just legends, buried beneath the rubble of centuries. The obsidian veil drifted through the atmosphere, its sleek form blending seamlessly with the surrounding environment. The mission was simple: retrieve the key to Earth's lost weapon, a weapon that, according to the legends, could rival anything the Therax had in their arsenal. The first destination was the ruins of a city once known as Elysium, hidden beneath a dense canopy of trees that had taken root in the remains of human architecture. As the team disembarked and moved toward the heart of the ruins, Celine felt a strange unease in the air. There was no sound, no birds, no rustling leaves. It was as if the earth itself had been silenced. "This place feels wrong," Cade murmured, his eyes scanning the horizon. The squad moved in tight formation, their weapons at the ready. The air was thick with tension, and the further they ventured into the forgotten city, the more the ruins seemed to close in on them. They reached a crumbling structure, its stone walls covered in ancient glyphs that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Celine's fingers traced the symbols, feeling a surge of something unfamiliar. It was a sensation that hummed beneath her skin, like a forgotten memory trying to resurface. "There's something here," she whispered, more to herself than to her team. She motioned for them to continue their sweep of the area. As the squad spread out, searching for any sign of the weapon, the air around them seemed to grow heavier. It was Riker who first uncovered the hidden passage, a narrow doorway concealed beneath a pile of ancient rubble. His voice rang out as he pried the stones apart, revealing the steep stairwell leading deep into the earth. The air smelled stale and musty, untouched for centuries. "Looks like we're going down," Celine said, her voice resolute as she gestured for her team to follow. They descended into the darkness, their flashlights casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. As they reached the bottom, the passage opened into a vast underground chamber. At the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and upon it lay an object that radiated an unnatural energy, a crystalline structure, its surface shimmering with an inner light. "This is it," Celine breathed, her heart quickening. The weapon of Earth's forgotten past. But as her hand reached for it, a sudden rumble shook the ground beneath them. The chamber's walls groaned, and dust rained down from the ceiling. "Move," she shouted, pushing her team back as the ground cracked open in a series of violent tremors. The entrance they had come through collapsed, trapping them inside. From the shadows, a new danger emerged. Humanoid figures, clad in ancient armor, their eyes glowing with a strange, otherworldly light. These were not mere relics of the past. They were something more, something that had been waiting for centuries. "Prepare for battle," Celine barked as the ancient warriors began to advance. Their movements were unnaturally precise, their weapons gleaming with an eerie power. The Shadow Legion was surrounded. The ancient warriors advanced with a chilling synchronicity, their gleaming weapons reflecting the dim light of the chamber as they closed in on the Shadow Legion. The air was thick with tension, the distant rumble of collapsing stone above them, masking the eerie silence of the enemy's approach. Celine's instincts kicked in, and she barked orders, her voice sharp and commanding. "Hold the line. Form a perimeter." Her team reacted immediately, their training taking over as they spread out in formation, rifles raised, eyes scanning every inch of the cavern. Cade fired first, his plasma rifle's shots reverberating through the stone walls, but the ancient warriors seemed unfazed. Their armor was unlike anything the Legion had ever encountered. Dark, metallic, and impossibly resistant to the energy blasts that normally obliterated most adversaries. It absorbed the shots, leaving no trace behind except for the faint hum of their shields. "Shields are holding," Cade yelled over the comm, frustration evident in his voice. "These things are tougher than anything we faced." Celine's eyes flicked to the crystal pedestal at the center of the room. They couldn't afford to waste time fighting these warriors. They had a mission to complete, and the artifact in front of her was their key to victory. She made a split-second decision. "Cover me," she shouted as she bolted toward the pedestal. She felt the weight of her team's gaze on her, but they knew she was right. The warriors could be fought, but the weapon was their true prize. As Celine sprinted toward the pedestal, a flash of movement caught her eye. One of the ancient figures lunged at her, its sword cutting through the air with unnatural speed. Without thinking, she ducked, rolling to the side as the blade slashed through the air, inches from her head. She landed in a crouch, her hand already on the hilt of her combat knife. She spun, slashing upward with a lethal precision honed through years of combat, her knife meeting the warrior's blade with a loud clash. The force of the strike pushed her back, but she didn't falter. The enemy was fast, but she was faster. Celine's knife dug deep into the warrior's chest, and it crumpled to the floor, lifeless. "Captain, move," Riker shouted, snapping her out of her momentary distraction. "The others are closing in." Celine didn't waste another second. She vaulted over the fallen warrior, closing the remaining distance to the pedestal. As her hand brushed the crystal surface, a surge of energy shot through her, knocking her back with a violent force. She gasped, her vision blurring as the power of the artifact overwhelmed her senses. Images flooded her mind, visions of a time long past, of humanity fighting against an ancient enemy. The warriors, she realized, were not just protectors of the artifact. They were its keepers, bound to it by an ancient oath. The crystal pulsed with life, its energy resonating with something deep within her. She felt connected to it, and to Earth, as if the weight of centuries of history had suddenly fallen upon her. "Captain." Riker's voice broke through her haze, urgent. "We need to get out of here now." Shaking off the disorienting visions, Celine regained her focus. The ancient warriors were relentless, but the Legion's mission was far from over. The weapon was activated, and now it was time to use it. "Prepare for extraction," Celine shouted, signaling her team. The chamber was collapsing around them, the walls beginning to crack and fall as the energy from the crystal surged. With the artifact secured, there was no more time for hesitation. "Cover the exit," Cade shouted as the team fought off the remaining warriors, pushing toward the only way out. The chamber's ceiling was beginning to crumble, but the way ahead was clear, if they could just make it out before the entire ruin collapsed. But the Thorax would be coming. Celine knew this was only the beginning. With the weapon in hand, the Shadowed Legion was about to become Earth's last hope. But at what cost? As they made their way through the labyrinthine tunnels, the sound of collapsing stone grew louder behind them, urging them forward. Time was running out. The collapse of the ancient chamber echoed behind them, a rumbling roar of destruction that threatened to swallow everything in its path. Dust and debris rained down as Celine led her team through the narrow passageways, their footfalls quick and heavy. The weight of the artifact, now securely locked in a containment field on her back, was a constant reminder of the stakes. They had what they came for, but escape was far from certain. The ancient warriors may have been defeated, but they were only one part of the larger puzzle. "Move faster," Celine barked, urging her team forward as the tunnel's walls groaned under the pressure of the crumbling ruins. The ancient weapon they had uncovered had triggered something, a cascade of energy that now seemed to be destabilizing the entire structure. They had no idea how long they had before the whole place came down on top of them. Ahead, the faint glow of the exit tunnel beckoned, a narrow shaft leading up to the surface. It was their only chance. But as they neared the tunnel, a deep growl reverberated through the stone. The team froze, weapons raised, scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. "Did anyone else hear that?" Cade asked, his voice tight with tension. Celine nodded grimly. "Stay alert. We're not out of this yet." Suddenly, from the darkness ahead, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, reached their ears. But the creatures making them weren't visible. They were cloaked in the same adaptive stealth technology as the Thorax elite soldiers, only this time, it wasn't just one or two of them. The sounds came from all directions. A shimmer in the shadows, barely perceptible, was all the warning they got before the first attacker lunged. It moved like a wraith, quick and deadly, aiming straight for Riker. The soldier's reflexes were sharp, and he managed to sidestep just in time, but the force of the blow sent him crashing into the wall. "Ambush!" Riker yelled, already scrambling to his feet. The team opened fire, their weapons lighting up the cavern in bursts of plasma and tracer rounds, but every shot seemed to pass through the attackers, who flickered in and out of visibility. The adaptive camouflage these new enemies wore was advanced, far beyond anything the Legion had seen. The Thorax had hidden even more of their arsenal from humanity, weapons of war crafted with technologies that defied understanding. "Get to the exit," Celine shouted, trying to maintain control in the chaos. The enemy was too elusive, too fast. They couldn't afford to waste time in this fight. But just as they started moving again, something new emerged from the darkness. A hulking figure, much larger than any of the cloaked soldiers, stepped into the dim light. Its armor gleamed in the low glow, jagged and scarred, like something built for brutality. The creature's eyes, glowing an unsettling red, fixed on Celine. "Captain," Cade shouted, but there was no time to react. The figure swung a massive, energy-charged axe, cutting through the air with a shriek of power. Celine barely managed to dive to the side, the weapon missing her by inches. The shockwave from the strike sent a ripple through the air, knocking the team off balance. "We can't fight this thing," Riker shouted, regaining his footing. "It's too strong." Celine's mind raced as she rolled to her feet. They were outmatched. The warriors, the cloaked figures, they were all part of something larger. The Therax had been planning this. They had known about Earth's attempts to strike back, and now, with the weapon in their hands, they were facing the consequences of their actions. The Therax were not just fighting humanity. They were ensuring that Earth's fight could never truly begin. With the hulking figure advancing on them, Celine's instincts screamed for action. She could sense the tension in her team, the desperation creeping in as the creature's axe swung again, forcing them to retreat. This was no ordinary battle. This was the beginning of a war within the war. "We need to retreat," Celine shouted, but as she turned to lead her team back toward the exit, she realized there was only one option left. They had to break through. The stakes had just been raised higher than they ever imagined. The real enemy was no longer hidden in the shadows. It was standing before them. The massive figure loomed over them, its red glowing eyes locked onto Celine as it swung its energy-charged axe in a wide arc. She barely managed to roll out of the way, the blade's passing gust of wind ruffling her hair. Her team was scattered, desperately trying to keep their distance from the hulking figure. Every time they tried to fire, the creature's armor absorbed their shots, leaving only faint sparks behind. "We're not going to last like this," Riker panted, his plasma rifle now overheating from repeated shots. The brute's strikes sent shockwaves through the cavern, knocking their footing off balance. It was like fighting an unstoppable force. "Fall back," Celine commanded, motioning toward the exit tunnel. They couldn't defeat this thing, not with the resources they had. The only chance they had left was to escape. But as she moved to leave the team, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. It wasn't just the brute's strikes. It was something more, something that threatened to bring the entire cavern down. "The tunnel," Cade shouted, his voice rising in panic as the walls shook violently. The ground cracked open, splitting wide beneath them. The path to freedom was vanishing before their eyes. "We need to go now," Celine ordered, realizing that the only way out was to push through the chaos and escape the collapsing ruins before they were buried alive. The brute's strike hit again, sending another shockwave through the air, but this time it was too close. Riker was knocked off his feet, the ground splintering under him. He fell hard, his weapon slipping from his grip. "Riker," Celine shouted, scrambling to reach him. "I'm fine." Riker grunted, though he was clearly struggling to regain his footing. The creature loomed closer, a thunderous step at a time, its axe gleaming with lethal intent. "Keep moving," Celine yelled, grabbing Riker's arm and pulling him to his feet. There was no time to fight back, no time to plan. She had to trust that their training and their instinct would guide them now. The brute was powerful, but the team was faster. With Riker back on his feet, they sprinted toward the exit tunnel, the tremors in the ground intensifying. Behind them, the brute's booming steps followed relentlessly, but the sound of cracking stone and collapsing ceilings now drowned out everything else. The tunnel ahead was narrowing, rocks and debris piling up, threatening to block their path. "Go," Cade shouted, leaping forward to clear the way. His rifle was useless now, but his combat skills were sharp. He shoved a massive rock aside, revealing just enough of the tunnel to squeeze through. The team followed him, one by one, as they fought to reach safety. They reached the end of the tunnel, but there was no time to savor their victory. The entrance was blocked by a massive pile of rocks, sealing them in. The ground behind them rumbled louder, and a deafening crash filled the air as the entire cavern began to collapse. "We're not going to make it," Cade yelled, panic edging his voice. "We'll make it," Celine barked, her voice unwavering. She turned to face her team, her eyes fierce with determination. "Move those rocks. Now." The team wasted no time. They worked together, lifting and throwing rocks aside as the ceiling above them groaned and shifted. The tremors were getting worse, and they could hear the deep, resonant hum of something powering up. The brute's weapon, likely, charging for a final strike. Celine gritted her teeth as she shoved another large rock away. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but she could feel the air growing thicker with each passing second. The exit was in sight. They could see the faint glow of the surface outside, the promise of safety. Finally, with one final push, the last barrier was gone. The team scrambled out of the tunnel and onto the surface of the desolate planet. Behind them, the last echoes of the cave's destruction filled the air, the sound of their former prison collapsing into the earth. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of their escape settling over them. But Celine knew that this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. The brute, the ancient warriors, they were only the beginning. The real battle was about to unfold, and they had no choice but to continue forward. "Captain," Riker said, his voice hoarse. "What now?" Celine looked out at the barren landscape, feeling the weight of their mission. "Now, we take the fight to them. We have the weapon, and we're going to use it." With the artifacts secured, and their mission far from over, the team knew they had just crossed a dangerous threshold. But the real war, against the Thorax, and whatever lay beyond, was just beginning. The barren landscape stretched out before them, a desolate reminder of the world Earth had once been. Celine stood at the forefront, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon, where the last rays of a dying sun bathed the planet in an eerie glow. The team had made it out of the collapsing ruins, but they knew that the real fight was far from over. With the ancient weapon in their hands, they now had to confront the Thorax, an enemy that had been waiting for Earth to make a move, and now they were about to pay the price. "Any sign of the Thorax?" Celine asked, her voice low, almost too quiet against the howling wind. They had been out of contact with their main forces for hours, and the silence was unnerving. Cade shook his head. "Nothing. But they're close. I can feel it." His eyes scanned the horizon, his stance tense, ready for any sign of an attack. Celine didn't need to ask again. The Thorax were everywhere, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The Shadow Legion had always been prepared for a fight. But this was different. The weapon they had just uncovered was humanity's last chance. If they could unlock its full potential, they might stand a chance against the alien invaders. But if they failed... "Captain," Riker's voice broke into her thoughts. He held up a small handheld device, his expression grim. "I've located a signal. It's faint, but it's coming from one of the orbital stations." Celine's pulse quickened. The orbital stations had been the last line of defense before the Thorax overwhelmed Earth's space fleet. But with Earth's forces scattered and communication systems crippled, she hadn't expected to hear from them. "Can you trace it?" she asked, her voice firm despite the rush of adrenaline in her veins. Riker nodded. "I can triangulate its position. It's coming from one of the old military command centers. It could be a trap, but if we can make contact, we might get some support." Celine didn't hesitate. "Set the coordinates. We're going there." The team moved quickly, their pace set by the urgency of the mission. As they traveled, the landscape seemed to close in on them, a landscape scarred by war and time. The air was thick with the tension of an impending confrontation, each footstep echoing in the emptiness. Hours passed as they navigated the harsh terrain, but Celine never wavered in her resolve. The Therax were coming, and they were prepared to fight until the last breath. But she had one more card to play, one more chance to strike before humanity was overwhelmed completely. They finally arrived at the station, a decaying relic of humanity's former power. The walls of the structure were barely standing, the once proud building now reduced to little more than rubble. Yet inside, the signal still pulsed faintly, a beacon of hope. Inside, Celine commanded, her voice steely as she led the team into the station's depths. They descended into the dark, their footsteps muffled by the dust and debris that filled the halls. The air inside was cold and stale, but the hum of the station's power still lingered, a quiet reminder that something within it had survived the fall of Earth. The deeper they went, the more the tension mounted. They weren't alone. A flicker of motion caught Celine's eye. Too quick to be a person, her hand shot up, signaling the team to halt. "Stay quiet," she whispered, her gaze scanning the shadows. The faintest whisper of a footstep echoed through the corridor. Something, or someone, was waiting. The team raised their weapons, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The station was their last hope for reinforcements, but it had also become a trap. "Get ready," Celine said, her voice low but fierce. The final countdown had begun, and there would be no turning back. The silence in the depths of the station was almost deafening. Every creak of the old metal beams and every drop of water echoing through the abandoned halls seemed amplified. Celine could feel the weight of her breath, the thrum of her heartbeat in her ears. This was it, the final confrontation. The station had once been the hub of humanity's last defense, its corridors lined with the hopes of an entire world. Now it was a dark and decaying mausoleum, its power dwindling to a flicker. The signal had drawn them here, but what they found inside was far more than they had anticipated. "We're not alone," Cade whispered, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the shadows ahead. "I can feel them, watching us." Celine motioned for the team to stay close, their weapons at the ready. The faint hum of power in the walls was the only indication that the station hadn't completely fallen into ruin. She had a sense that whoever, or whatever, was hiding in the station wasn't just waiting. They were hunting. The team crept forward, their movements synchronized as they approached what appeared to be the central command room. A flickering light from within illuminated the door, casting strange, distorted shadows across the walls. Celine signaled for a quick breach. With a sharp motion, she slammed her shoulder into the door, pushing it open with all her strength. The room inside was vast, its control panels long since shattered, wires hanging loose from the ceiling. But in the center of it all stood something unexpected, a holographic map of Earth. And beside it, in the darkened corners, were the figures they had feared most, the Therax. Their camouflaged forms shimmered in and out of visibility, silently advancing, their eyes glowing with malice. Celine's breath caught in her throat as she realized the depth of their ambush. These weren't just the Therax soldiers they had encountered before. These were elite assassins, much more dangerous and cunning than anything they had faced. There were too many of them. Far too many. The leader of the group, a towering figure with cruelly glowing eyes and sleek black armor, stepped forward. His voice was a low rasp, almost a whisper, but it cut through the tension like a blade. "You are too late, humans," the Therax commander sneered. "Earth's time is over. The Shadow Legion was never meant to survive. The final battle ends here." Without warning, the Therax elite lunged, their blades flashing as they materialized from the shadows. The team reacted instantly. Gunfire erupted, bright streaks of plasma lighting up the darkroom. But the Therax were fast. They ducked, dodged, and countered with brutal precision. Each strike was a near miss, each bullet deflected with unnerving ease. Celine's heart pounded in her chest as she dove behind a shattered console, taking cover. The rest of the team fought with everything they had. But the Therax were relentless. Each attack came with overwhelming force, pushing them back. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and running out of time. "Captain," Riker shouted, his voice strained. "We can't keep this up." Celine's mind raced. The artifact, the weapon they had uncovered, was the key, but they hadn't had the time to study it properly, to understand its true potential. She had to trust her instincts. "Get to the control panel," she yelled. "I need a minute. Cover me." Her team responded with fierce determination. Cade and Riker laid down suppressive fire, keeping the Therax at bay, as Celine sprinted for the console. She reached it, her hands shaking, and immediately began interfacing with the ancient technology. The hum of energy in the room grew louder as the artifact on her back began to resonate with the station's systems. The holographic map of Earth flickered, then expanded. Lines of power began to pulse, sending waves of energy through the control room. Celine could feel the power surging in her fingertips, connecting her to something far beyond her comprehension. "This is it," she muttered to herself. The artifact was amplifying the station's power systems. She could turn the tide now, but only if she could activate the weapon in time. A loud crash interrupted her focus as a Therax soldier lunged at her from behind. But just as the creature reached her, a burst of light erupted from the console, sending a shockwave of energy through the room. The Therax were thrown back, their camouflaged forms flickering erratically. The weapon was active. "Now," Celine shouted, "take them down." With renewed strength, the team unleashed a torrent of firepower, but this time it was different. The energy from the artifact surged through the station's systems, amplifying their weapons. The Therax faltered, their once impenetrable armor now unable to withstand the concentrated assault. Celine's heart raced as she pressed the final sequence on the console, activating the station's full arsenal. A massive beam of energy shot from the heart of the station, striking the Therax commander and his elite forces. The blast reverberated through the room, and the figures disintegrated into ash, their weapons falling useless to the floor. As the dust settled, Celine and her team stood victorious, breathing heavily, but alive. The battle was over, but the war had only just begun.